Reading from 2 Chronicles, chapter 7, verses 11 to 22. Thus Solomon finished the house of the Lord and the king's house. All that Solomon had planned to do in the house of the Lord and in his own house, he successfully accomplished. Then the Lord appeared to Solomon in the night and said to him, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a house of sacrifice. When I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, or command the locusts to devour the land, or send pestilence among my people, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. Now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to the prayer that is made in this place. For now I have chosen and consecrated this house that my name may be there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there for all time. And as for you, if you will walk before me as David your father walked, doing according to all that I have commanded you and keeping my statutes and my rules, then I will establish your royal throne, as I covenanted with David your father, saying, You shall not lack a man to rule Israel. But if you turn aside and forsake my statutes and my commandments that I have set before you, and go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will pluck you up from my land that I have given you, and this house that I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight, and I will make it a proverb and a byword among all peoples. And at this house which was exalted, everyone passing by will be astonished and say, Why has the Lord done thus to this land and to this house? Then they will say, Because they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, and laid hold on other gods and worshipped them and served them. Therefore, he has brought all this disaster on them. When Solomon finished his prayer at the dedication of the temple, suddenly fire fell from heaven, consuming the sacrifices laid before the Lord. The glory of God filled the temple, so overwhelming that the priest could not enter. This moment, recorded in 2 Chronicles 7, was one of divine approval, celebration, and an undeniable manifestation of God's presence. Yet, woven into this scene of glory was a solemn message, a blessing and a warning that resonates just as powerfully with us today. This episode mirrors the moment in the wilderness when the children of Israel completed the work of the tabernacle. They had carefully followed the instructions given by the Lord through Moses, and upon dedication, the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Here too, fire fell upon the altar, signifying God's acceptance of their worship and his intention to dwell among his people. The people responded with praise and gratitude, acknowledging God's enduring goodness. They celebrated with a week-long feast and returned home joyfully. But after the closing mass gathering, when everyone had gone back home, the Lord appeared to Solomon again that night. The first time God visited him was after his father's death, when Solomon asked for wisdom to be a good and just ruler over God's people. This time, God offered both an affirmation and a warning. The Lord had accepted Solomon's petition to put his name on the temple. He would constantly hear the prayers offered there. At any moment, even during a time of judgment, he would forgive and heal his people if they repented with sincerity and humility and prayed for restoration. Conversely, the temple of God would be abandoned and destroyed if his people turned away from him to serve other gods. All the work of its construction, the immense riches poured into it, its grandeur and beauty would be valueless without a heart of sincerity towards their God. The conditions for God's healing and restoration are timeless. They begin with humility, seeing ourselves as God sees us, acknowledging our dependence on Him. This humility leads to prayer and an earnest pursuit of God. The prophet Zephaniah describes this as seeking righteousness and humility, aligning our lives with God's will. It involves true repentance, that is, turning away from sin, forsaking the behaviors and attitudes that separate us from God. Proverbs 28:13 reminds us, "Whoever conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them will obtain mercy." In the parable of the prodigal son, when the foolish son came to his senses, sobered by poverty and starvation, he realized that everything he needed was available in abundance at his home, the same home that he had carelessly and wickedly tossed aside. Humbled by the truth, he decided to return home and beg for a post as a servant rather than perish in the filth of pigsty because of his senseless pride. But as he neared home, his father came running to embrace him and restore him to sonship. This is the heart of God, a joyful readiness to forgive and restore anyone who returns home to him. Tragically, Solomon and his people failed to cultivate a heart of loyalty to God. Despite hearing the voice of the Lord twice, Solomon allowed his heart to drift. He disobeyed the instructions of his God, amassing wealth, chariots, and wives. His foreign wives led him to worship foreign gods. The subsequent kings of Israel and Judah followed a similar path of disobedience, and eventually the warnings of 2 Chronicles 7 came to pass. Both the northern and southern kingdoms were exiled, and the magnificent temple was reduced to ruins. This account is more than history. It is a mirror for our own lives. God's blessings and His presence must not lead us to become complacent. Prosperity and success must not instill a false sense of security where we rely on our achievements rather than on God. No amount of wisdom, wealth, or human accomplishment can substitute for a heart fully surrendered to God. The temptation to replace God with idols is just as real today, though our idols may look different. Rather than serving God with a single heart, we may pursue our careers, relationships, financial security, or ambitions. In Revelation 3, Jesus rebukes the church in Laodicea for their lukewarm faith, saying, "You say, 'I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing,' not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked." All that we can do in such a plight is to return to Him and enjoy the true riches of His endless love and approval. C.T. Studd was a wealthy English cricketer who gave up his fortune to serve as a missionary in China, India, and Africa. His motto was, "Only one life. It'll soon be past. Only what is done for Christ will last." His life challenges us to examine what we are living for. Are we building temples of stone and wealth, or are we investing in what has eternal value? Let us guard our hearts. Starting well isn't enough. we must finish well as well. The Apostle Paul urges us to run the race with perseverance, keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus. Let us regularly evaluate our priorities and ask ourselves whether God truly has the highest place in our lives. Are we humbling ourselves before Him, seeking His face, and turning from anything that dishonors Him? The blessings of God are abundant, but they come with a responsibility. Like Solomon, we are entrusted with much, and the way we respond determines the legacy we leave. Let us heed both the blessings and the warnings of 2 Chronicles 7. Let us not only rejoice at His blessings and reassurance and His glorious works in our lives, but also walk faithfully, firmly fixed on Him as the center of our lives. For only in Him do we find true prosperity, peace, and purpose. God bless.